The first video got quite a bit of dislikes, not entirely sure what I did wrong since I didn't get any comments telling me like any feedback. So I'll just be making this one into a super long video because I'm assuming that people don't like my Magic stuff, which sucks because I do enjoy Magic a lot. I love the game, but I mean, if people don't enjoy it, I'll just try to make less content of it. Let's just jump into it. Abyssal Gore Stalker, 6 mana. It's uncommon, surprisingly, because it's a pretty bad effect. Yeah, each player sacrifices 2 creatures, but you have to sacrifice as well, so not impressive. Archozoid's Deepest Betrayal for 5 mana just seems like an all-in monster that doesn't do anything terribly well, but it's not like a really bad card. It's just not something I seeing play in standard meta. When it dies, it becomes a land that can transform back into the monster only if a player has 1 or fewer cards in hand. This card's already expensive as is. Chances of your opponent or you having 1 or fewer cards in hand, specifically you, because you're not going to be able to like play out all your cards since you're probably playing cards like Sheldred, maybe Beseeching the Mirror, some of the more expensive black cards. I don't see this card being run in any standard black meta decks. Acolyte of Alclazorts. I mean, no, 3 mana for a 1/4, stats are bad, the effect is bad, it's just a name, I guess. So in the right deck, another chance can essentially turn that mill 2 into 2 extra cards for advantage, whether they be cards in your graveyard that do something, or cards when sent to the graveyard do something. I haven't really seen too many of those in Magic. When they're sent to the graveyard it accomplishes something, but there may be cards like that. Besides that, you also get to return 2 creatures from the graveyard to the hand. I mean, that's pretty powerful with no restriction on the creature, mana value, or class type, or whatever. I think it's an interesting, good card. It's also an instant, which is like exactly where it should be. Bitter Triumph is essentially 2 mana, you discard a card or pay 3 life, and you destroy a monster on the field. It's just removal for draft. I don't see it seeing play outside of draft. Bloodletter of Alkazoids is 4 mana, and it's essentially if your opponent loses life, they lose a little bit more. I don't see it seeing competitive play, but it may see its place in some burn strategies, maybe Fire and Dark. Bloodthorn Veil is kind of unimpressive. Yeah, I can equip this card to a creature like right away just by discarding 1 card, but it doesn't do much besides just give it like 2 attack or offense and 1 defense, so it's not the best. Bringer of the Last Gift is a strange card. It's definitely a game-ending card, but it's 8 mana. I do like its effect that it clears a board and then reborns everything that wasn't on the board originally. Even your opponent gets to reborn their stuff. I don't like that. I don't like giving opponent cards, but it seems like a fun boss monster. Not terribly competitive, but it does seem fun. Broad Rage Microid for 4 mana essentially generates creature tokens every time a card is sent to your graveyard. You might be able to trigger it, but it seems like it's only like once and only during your end step, not during either player's end step. It's too weak. It's very, very weak. Canonized in Blood for 2 mana. Essentially, during the end step, if a card is sent to your graveyard, you can put a counter on a monster you control. Also for 7 mana, sacrifice a card and summon a 4/3 vampire flying creature token. It's not the worst, but it's not the best either. It's very like weak in terms of power level. Chupacabra Echo for 4 mana is essentially removal determined by how many cards you have in your graveyard, but it's just targeted removal. So now Beseeching Mirror has targeted monster removal that's also built-in monster, so you get a 3/2 along with the removal. Corpse of the Lost for 3 mana provides support for skeletons, but it also gives you a skeleton, which takes advantage of that immediate support you got from activating. You get a 2/2 skeleton pirate creature token. The cool thing about this card is that it never goes away. At the beginning of your end step, if you descended, so if a permanent went to your graveyard, you just add this card back to your hand. You really can abuse this card. Dead Weight, 1 mana, enchant creature. The enchanted creature gets -2, -2. So it's like removal. It's slow removal. In draft, it'll see play outside. I doubt it. Death Cap Marionette, 2 mana. So we have a mill 2 combined with Death Touch, and it's only common rarity. I will take that. I wanted one of those, and I mean, Death Touch is extremely powerful. Might be seeing some more first strike in the meta if Deathcap Marionette sees a lot of play. Deep Goblin's Gold Taker just seems like a weaker version of this card. They kind of do the same thing. They get bigger, they have menace, except this guy, Deep Goblin, doesn't need to attack, and she does. Deep Cavern Bat for 2 mana is cool, but I don't really see it seeing play in the meta. The main reason for this is because it does let you look at your opponent's hand and exile a card from it, But there's so much weak monster removal in the game that I don't see this card sticking around for like longer than a turn or two. Defossilize for 5 mana is a monster reborn. Target a creature in your graveyard, special summon it back, but this time it explores twice. If you hit a land twice, you draw 2. If you don't hit a land twice, your monster gets 2 counters on it. Defossilize will see play in draft, but I don't see it seeing play in standard. Echo the Dust, so it's 3/3 and has lifelink. It's not the best. It doesn't have flying. The only way I can see Fanatical Offering actually being good for 2 mana is that the artifact or creature that you sacrifice wants to be sent to the graveyard to fulfill a cost. Drawing 2 and creating a map token, which could potentially draw you another card, isn't the worst thing in the world for 2 mana, but you do have to sacrifice something, which, I mean, at that point, this should have been 1 mana. I didn't expect to see a sleeper card so soon. Fungal Fortitude for 2 mana is enchant creature, your monster gets more attack. But the best part about it is that it's flash, meaning you can do it during your opponent's turn. Also, when your monster dies, it just returns back to the battlefield, which may trigger when it enters a battlefield or any other similar type of effect. Gargantian Leech. And Cave Strategies, it's a big monster. I don't think I've seen any of the Cave cards. I have been told in the comments that caves refer to lands that are in this set. Grasping Shadows for 4 mana essentially makes it so if you attack alone with any of your creatures, it gains not only Death Touch, but lifelink. So literally it turns any one of your monsters into removal, even tokens, as long as it attacks alone. After you use that 3 times, you can transform it into a land. That just draws you a card and loses you 1 life. Now you can only activate that 3 or more times depending on how many counters are on it. But that is cool. That is a lot of util in 1 card. I might be running that, especially since it's a low rarity. Greedy Freebooter is 1 mana, and when it dies, you scry 1 and you get a treasure token. Doesn't have Death Touch or anything like that, but it kind of does something, and it does it good enough, but not well enough to be considered for standard meta. It is a decent card though. Join the Dead for 3 mana is an instant removal for monsters. Malicious Eclipse for 3 mana is a decent-ish low mana value board wipe as long as the monster has 2 or less toughness or defense. It gets exiled and dies. The only problem with this card is that it's not an instant. I would have loved to see this card as an instant and might see play then. Mephitic Drop for 2 mana is one of the best artifact engine cards I've seen in a while. Now it doesn't do too much, but it does something extremely well. When it enters the battlefield, draw a card. You lose a life, yeah, but you draw a card. That's cool. But the better part is that when it's put into the graveyard, you draw a card too. Also, I don't see anywhere where it says this is a once per turn. Meaning you could loop this card theoretically, and you could keep drawing cards over and over and over. That is an extremely powerful card, not only in standard, in draft, but even in older formats where drawing a card means a lot more than it does in standard. This is definitely an extremely powerful card. That is probably one of the best black cards I've seen in a while, considering the fact that it has 4 toughness or 4 defense. That is huge. That is very huge. It means that Mosswood can't get over it. Tenacious can't get over it. Primordial Gnar for 5 mana has decent-ish stats. It's a 5/2, which means that it could clear things, but it's not going to survive for very long. But do you really want it to survive? When it dies, you discover 3. Essentially, you can look to the top of your deck for a mana value 3 or less, add it to your hand or play it without paying its mana cost. Queen's Bay Paladin for 5 mana seems like a fun vampire support card, not really something that I consider meta. Rampaging Spiketail for 6 mana is a swamp cycling, but it's also a give monster attack and indestructible until the end of the turn. Now, the only thing that I think I would want this card to have is Flash, but I think Flash would have made it way too broken, right? It would have made it one of the best cards in the set. Ray of Ruin is 5 mana slow removal, but it's removal for anything that's a non-basic land. I wouldn't run it, I don't like it, and even in draft I think I would pass it up. Screaming Phantom, 3 mana. That is bad, but it's good enough in draft. I wouldn't run this outside of draft though, it's really bad. Skullcap Snail is essentially your opponent discards a card, or in this case, they exile a card. That's not bad. It's pretty good. It's actually pretty good. I actually like that card a lot. Soulcoil Viper for 3 mana seems like it just reborns a card from your graveyard by sacrificing it and playing 1 mana. The stats aren't the best. It also doesn't have any additional effects like Flying, Death Touch, First Strike. Reborning a monster from your graveyard's cool. It just feels like it's more like one of the reborn spells, except it's a built-in monster, which it hasn't been so far, and is good in my opinion, but it's not good enough. Souls of the Lost for 2 mana is one of the better black cards in this set. It's essentially power and toughness is equal to the permanent cards in your graveyard. There are already cards like this in the game, and they're not bad. They're not bad at all. The best part about this one is that it's only 2 mana. Yeah, you have to sacrifice something or discard a card to summon it. But dude, 2 mana for a big body, plus you discard, which adds to the fuel, the power. It's pretty good. In fact, it's so good, it might warp the meta. I could see this card warping the meta. You need an out for it. You need to go for the throat. You need something big to get rid of this guy. Especially considering the fact that it just gets a +1 in toughness. Like, why? Definitely a powerful card to look out for. Talking about meta-defining cards, we have Stacklight Stalker for 1 mana. It's a menace 1/1. And at the end step, if you descended, put a counter on this card. That's cool and all, right? The best part is that it's removal for a monster. For 3 mana, you sacrifice this card. Target creature gets -X, -X. Storming Revenant for 4 mana gives you the option to draw 2 cards for 6 life, to mill 2 cards, or to mill 1 card and to draw 1 card and lose 3 life. It also has an additional on-field effect that if you have 8 or more permanents in your graveyard, every time you draw a card, your opponent loses life and you gain life. That's not necessarily the best effect in the world, but it's not the worst. It's pretty mid, in my opinion. I wouldn't run Starving Revenant. Digging Cavern Crawler for 3 mana is a Death Touch 1/3, and if you have 4 more permanents in your graveyard, every time it attacks, you draw a card and lose 1 life. It's not bad. I like it. I like it a lot. So Synapse Necromage for 3 mana is a 3/1 floating monster. When it dies, it creates 2 tokens that are 1/1. They cannot block, but I mean, maybe you can do something with them. Not impressive. Terrarian's Journal for 4 mana gives me like meta vibes. It's sacrifice another artifact creature, draw a card. That's a good effect. You don't pay mana to activate that effect either. Or the crazy effect is for 2 mana, you tap this card, you can discard your hand. I know that's a lot of cards, but you transform it into a land that allows you to play creature cards from your graveyard. That is cool. Very, very cool. Your graveyard becomes a second hand. I like this card a lot. It's cool. Wait, so black has a board wipe now? Okay, I was actually waiting for this. Tithing Blade for 2 mana is essentially a slow removal for an opponent's monster, but you could craft it. Exiling this card and a creature in your graveyard, you could transform it into a pretty mediocre effect. At the beginning of your upkeep, each opponent loses 1 life and you gain 1 life. Alright, Visage of Dread is way better. For 2 mana, you essentially get a look at your opponent's hand, and they discard an artifact or creature, and then later in the game, for 6 mana, you can transform this into a 5/4 menace monster that mills cards whenever it attacks or when it even enters the battlefield. It's pretty good. I kind of like it. Vito's Inquisitor for 4 mana is scary in draft. Outside of draft, I don't see it seeing play. Specifically for the fact that you sacrifice something else and it gets a 1/1 counter, which is cool, but Menace is a little bit more scary because it's a 4/4. Alright, let's move on to the fire. We got first card, a Braid for 2 mana. It deals 3 damage to target creature or destroy target artifact. It's an instant. I like it. It's cool. Ancestor's Aid, 2 mana. Target creature gets 2 and gains first strike. Whoa. And you create a treasure token. Okay, that's pretty good. Pretty powerful. Belligerent Yearning seems like one of the best openers in a dinosaur deck. I don't know if dinosaur decks exist. Maybe you know more than me. But yeah, it just copies the base power of the dinosaur that's summoned after it. I like that. That's pretty decent, and it's not bad statted originally. I mean, it's a 3/2/2. It has trample as well. It does what it needs to do. Bone Horde Dracosaur for 5 mana is interesting, and not only is it a dinosaur, but it's also a dragon. It's kind of amazing. I like it a lot. It's like a great boss monster. It gets you a ton of advantage. 2 cards each turn, well, possibly 4 cards each turn. It's so good. Brass Tunnel's Grinder for 3 mana is good for the fact that it can discard your entire hand and replenish it, including this card, because you get a +1. But it's bad for the fact that you have to wait 3 turns in order to transform this card into a pretty decent land. Brazen Blade Master for 3 mana is a 2/3 that can become a 4/4 if you control 2 or more artifacts. No, not good. Breach's Eager Pillager for 3 mana is a powerful first strike 3/3 monster that not only triggers when it attacks, but any other pirate's attack. It's good support for pirate decks. Like, it's a very good card for a pirate strategy. Burning Sun Cavalry, 2 mana. No, it's bad. Flamnus Cave In, 4 mana. I haven't seen a single cave card so far, so I mean, does this count as a cave? Because it has cave in the name, but it has like a dash. I don't know. Maybe. I don't think it's a good card. Child of the Volcano, 4 mana. No, not good. Curator, the Sun's creation for 4 mana, essentially just lets you discover again. Not bad if you have a lot of cards that discover in draft. Outside of draft, I don't see a single play. Daring Discovery for 5 mana is kind of game ending, and it also gives you a backup plan with the Discover, which I do like. Diamond Pickaxe is cool. It's 1 mana. It cannot be destroyed. And whatever it's equipped to gets 1/1, but it also generates treasure tokens whenever it attacks, which isn't a bad effect. The only downside of this card is that it's equipped to, but I really do like it. It's pretty cool. Battle to Maiden for 4 mana is essentially, it has menace and it gives another monster menace, and it's 4/3. Dire Flare, 1 mana. It doesn't say deals damage to any target. It says creature specifically. I think this is a bad card. The Balancing Device for 2 mana is like another plain card that when an artifact enters the field, it gets a counter, except that one gives vigilance, this one gives haste. I think they work kind of well together. Also, this one can transform into an even better version, a land that can like do the same exact thing. So Dreadmaw's Ear is a booster that makes her stronger strong, and it's also a removal for an artifact that an opponent controls. Now, I don't see a lot of artifacts running around. Enhancements, yeah. Artifacts, no. So, not super powerful in the standard metagame. Enterprising Scallywag for 2 mana is a 2/2. If a permanent is sent to your graveyard, you create a treasure token. I like it. Decent. This is an interestingly powerful card because if you actually consider it, it costs 3 mana, but when you play it, you discover a 3 mana card off the top of your deck. So it's like you're playing this card for free, so you're getting a 1/1 counter and trample for free. You're not losing any card advantage because you just get it immediately back. One of the best cards, actually. Geological Appraiser, 4 mana. That one doesn't pay for itself, but I mean, for 1 mana, you get a 3/2. Goblin Tomb Raider is an interesting card. It's not the best, but it's not a bad card either. It's only good if you can have an artifact on the field. Then it like truly becomes live. Gold Fury Strider for 5 mana is pretty bad. It has trample. Yeah, you can make a monster bigger. It only activates as a sorcery, and the stats aren't impressive either for 5 mana. Hit the Mother Load is like, yo, free cards for days? You get to look for your deck for practically any card and play it, and then you get a bunch of tapped treasure tokens. Sad part is they're tapped. I wish they weren't tapped, but if they weren't, this card would have been just ban worthy. It's really good. Hotfoot Gnome, 3 mana. Haste, another target creature gains haste until the end of the turn. It's an artifact as well. Idol of the Deep King, 3 mana. This is a bad card. Now, I can see what they were doing with Idol of the Deep King. They're like, whoa, we have a removal that can also turn into potentially more damage. But in actuality, it costs 3 mana to deal 2 damage. It's pretty bad. Inti, Central of the Sun, 2 mana, is a legendary 2/2. That when it attacks, it gets a counter, gains trample, and you can play the card off the top of your deck. That is a lot for just 2 mana and on a body, and it's cool. Very cool card. Magnetic Galleon for 5 mana, to me, is like, you're running like a sorcery spell that does 5 damage, but then at the same time, hey, that sorcery spell is now a potential monster. If you have any monster with toughness 2, you can crew. And it's like, whoa, well, now we got a lot going here. We got removal, we got a monster. It's like, okay, we serious threat. P.3 Ixalan Deepest Might for 4 mana is a god. And it rightfully so. It's mythical. It has trample. It's 4/4 for 4 mana. Decent statted. Best effect is if a red source would deal any non-combat damage, now it deals 4, or whatever this guy's power and toughness is. That just can turn your 1 mana value red spells that deal like 2 damage into 4 damage. And you can end the game quick. The best part is that when this guy dies, he becomes a land that can become himself again if you can deal 4 or more non-basic damage that turn. Panic Altasaur for 5 mana is scary. It has reach, so it's just going to sit on your board and protect you from flying. But you could just tap it, not pay any mana, just literally tap it, and you deal 2 damage to your opponent. Now, 2 doesn't seem like a lot, right? But think about it. It has reach, which means that it's just sitting on your board to protect you from flying anyways. Now you have like an additional 2 burn on top of having reach. That's a lot of value. Plundering Pirate, 3 mana. Not the best thing in the world. Maybe you loop it? I don't know. It doesn't seem that good. Poetic Ingenuity, 3 mana. Damn, damn, damn. I like that. Too bad it's an enhancement. Imagine that was an artifact. Whoa, that would be amazing. This card's cool, but yeah, it's not as good as it could have been. Rampaging Ceratops, 5 mana. Rampaging Ceratops cannot be blocked except by 3 or more creatures. So it's like super trample. That's kind of annoying. Rumbling Rockslide for 4 mana is okay. It's a sorcery, it's not instant. In draft it'll see play, in standard it won't. The only sad part, or maybe good part I should say, is that it says target creature and it doesn't say any target, because you can't target your opponent. Imagine you could do like 10 or 9 damage to them eventually. That's a lot of damage for one spell. Sally's Lattice for 2 mana is decent on its own right. When it enters the battlefield, you discard a card, draw 2. That's a good effect. And potentially late game, or whenever you can, you could craft this card with dinosaurs in your graveyard, exile all of them, and make a potentially big monster up to the number of cards exiled. At least it'll be 2/4. At most, it could be super, super high in a dinosaur focused strategy. Skyclaw the Raptor, 3 mana. Yo, what? 3 mana, it's 4/3, and it burns your opponent if they play on your turn? That is power. That is really good. That is a good dinosaur card. Thematic Monstrosaur is a mountain cycling dinosaur, has trample, 6/5, stats are decentish. It's just the effect is sacrifice a land, draw a card, like bruh. Sunfire Torch, it's pretty bad. In fact, Sunfire Torch is one of the worst cards I've seen in its entire set. Sunshot Militia for 2 mana is bad. It's 1/3, and you tap 2 other artifacts or creature and you deal 1 damage, and only activate as a sorcery. Hypnotic Hazard, 1 mana. It deals 1 damage to each opponent and each creature they control. It's okay. Tramp and Chomp is a card to work well with the dinosaur specifically because it deals 2 damage or more if you have a dinosaur on your field with higher power value. Triumphing Carnosaur for 6 mana is impressive. It's trampling 7/6. Stats are very good. When it enters the battlefield, you discover 5. So technically, you're only playing this for 1 mana, and it's a 7/6 trample. But also, if it's in your hand, you can discard it and deal 3 damage to any monster or planeswalker. Like, that's a lot into 1 card. It's probably one of the best red cards. Volatile Wanderglyph, 2 mana. Yeah, if you can consistently tap it, yeah, not the worst thing in the world. It's like an engine card. Those aren't bad. They're just not like powerful in their own right. They work better as support for already powerful decks. Zoa's Justice, 2 mana. Zoa's Justice is terrible. I'm not going to really go too much into it. Yeah, you can remove your opponent's monster, but they can replace it with something else from their deck because they discover. Yeah, you could target your own monster, but then why are you even playing this card in the first place? You just play better cards. It just seems bad. It's a 3/3 for 3 mana, and you gain 3 life if you control a dinosaur or have one in your hand. Moving on. Basking Capybara. Oh, they should have made this card a rare or mythical. Capybaras are really cool. 2 mana. So for 2 mana, it's a potentially a 4/3 if you have 4 permanent cards in your graveyard. I love it. I love it a lot. I love the art. I love capybaras. All right, Bedrock Tortoise. Oh, this is a cool one too. For 4 mana, a potential 6 monster. I really like the blanket effect, but I don't think this card is terribly powerful. But it is interesting. Cavern Stomper, 6 mana. Good card in draft. I don't really see it seeing play outside of draft. Sendot Scout, 1 mana. No, I don't like it. I mean, it's not bad. It's just not good. Toady Scavenger, 3 mana. It's 3/2, and if you have 4 permanents in your graveyard, you can target a permanent card in your graveyard, return it to your hand. That's a very powerful effect, especially for a 3/2. Only bad part about this card, it's 3 mana, not 2. It's rather expensive. Velociraptor, 4 mana. Reach Trample, 4/5. No. Cosium Confluence seems to be a very powerful card, except it's kind of weird. It has to do with caves. So for 5 mana, you can apply 3 effects, and you can apply the same effect 3 times. So you could look for your deck for a cave card 3 times, put it onto the battlefield tapped, and shuffle. Not bad, right? You could put counters on cave and then it becomes 0/0. That one's confusing because it's like, what if you put the 3/1/1 counters on the same one cave monster? It wouldn't get 9 counters, would it? It would just become a 0/0 again and again and again. Disturb Slumber for 2 mana is interesting, mainly for the fact that you get a 4/4 dinosaur with reach and haste, so you can use this to protect yourself against flying. You can use this to be offensive with the haste. Or you can use this as a removal of a monster with 3 or less toughness. It's actually extremely interesting because it has a lot of versatility. Earthshaker Dreadmaw, 6 mana. I like it. It's like a good card in Dinosaurs. I like Explorer's Cachet for 2 mana, mainly for the fact that when it enters the battlefield, you get 2 counters, and you can just tap this card and put a counter on something else. That's cool. It's a sorcery. It's not super quick speed. But it also has a continuous effect where the monster you control dies with a counter, you can put it on Nisting, and then you can eventually just move the counters on Nisting onto something else. Glafta Stampede Tyrant, 8 mana. Trample. When it enters the battlefield, put any number of creature cards from your hand onto the... What? Is that real? That's, In Yu-Gi-Oh! There is like a card like that. It's called Pendulum Summoning. It's where you can special summon every monster in your hand. I've never seen a card in Magic do that, but now we have a monster which essentially lets you summon any monster from your hand. Wow, I can see why that's a mythical. That's really scary. I like Glimpse of the Core, mainly for the fact that it puts a land onto the battlefield tapped, which on turn 2 can really speed up your mid-ramp. Glowclap Lantern is a 1 mana, equipped for 2 mana, but once it's equipped to a monster, you can just look at the top of your library at any... That's like a power effect. That's such a power effect, combined with the fact that it also gives the monster, whenever it attacks, Explorer, with its which is like a potential draw 1. Glowing Rite of Itzmoc is a interesting card. It searches a monster using the top 4 cards of your deck. You can add it to your hand, but it also stays on the field and can eventually generate you so much mana that it might be game ending. Maybe in a token generating strategy, I can definitely see you just like speeding this out like turn 2 or 3. Ultali's Final Strike, 3 mana. If it was 2 mana, it'd be perfect. 3 mana is rather expensive. Glad it's an instant though. Ultali Poets of Unity, 3 mana. It's a decent-ish effect with kind of bad stats for 3 mana. But when it enters the battlefield, you add a basic plane. That's okay, it's not the best. Mainly is that you transform this for 5 mana, which is a mountain or a plain. It's strange because this is grass, but I guess you combine it with those colors and you get a pretty powerful Sage, which generates you 2 tokens that are pretty big, generates you mana, searches a dinosaur, and then a game ending one where your dinosaurs have double strike and trample. I mean, how do you lose if your dinosaurs have double strike and trample? It's kind of hard. Hulking Raptor for 4 mana is extremely powerful because if you have this guy on the board, you just get 2 free mana. And its stats aren't bad, and it's Ward 2. Very impressive. In the presence of Ages, no, it's too expensive. Maybe if it was 2 mana, it would have been super good. Intrepid Paleologist is a good green card. It's 2 mana, it's 2/2, good stats, and you can tap it to add mana. It does a lot there, but it has an additional effect for 2 additional mana, you can exile a target card from a graveyard. That is targeted removal in the graveyard. Targeting a card in your opponent's graveyard when they might need it, maybe adding it back to their hand or special summoning or whatever. Just getting rid of it is powerful. But what's even more powerful is that it also gives you an option to use your graveyard as a second hand, well, at least with dinosaur creature spells. So you have a lot of versatility with this card. It's good statted, good mana value, good effects. It's good. It's a great card. Ixali's Lorekeeper for 1 mana is just dinosaur support. It gives you 1 mana for dinosaurs. It's Jade Sea Stone for 4 mana is not the best, mainly for the fact that it's 4 mana. It's very expensive. When it enters the battlefield, you get 3 1/1 counters. So, I mean, it kind of pays for the fact that it's 4 mana. Also, you have a craftability. So, later in the game for 7 mana, you can turn it into a 7/7 monster that generates you a little bit of life. It's not that good, but it's not that bad. The craftability is really cool. I really like that because it gives you versatility late game. Wait, Jade Light Splunker is one of the best cards I've ever seen. For X 1/4s, you get a 1/1 that can get a lot of counters on it or get you a lot of lands in your hand. It's good early game, it's good late game. It's a very cool card. I like that one. Calcium Stone Tree is 3 mana, and you get to put 1 land from the top 6 cards of your deck onto the battlefield. That's pretty bad. It's only 1 land. It's also 3 mana. It's not 2 mana. It's too expensive. Craft with Cave is 6 mana and you get a vanilla 5/5. I mean, it's pretty bad. It's actually, yeah, it's pretty bad. Even with the craft ability, which is normally good, it's still bad. Malmet Battle Glyph 1 mana. Choose target creature you control and target creature you don't control. If a creature you control entered the battlefield this turn, put a 1/1 counter on it. And those creatures fight each other. It's just removal for green. Malmet Brawler 2 mana. It's 2/2, and when it attacks, a monster you control gets trample. I mean, it's 2/2, so no, not good enough. Malmet Scythe 3 mana. Flash. When it enters the battlefield, attach it to a creature you control. Gets 2/2. No, it's too much to re-equip, not worth. Malmet Veteran is like a draft boss, but outside of draft, it's not good. Mineshaft Spider is 4 mana, it's too expensive, and it doesn't mill that many cards, only 2. Also, the stats aren't good. Reach is okay, though. Neutering Bristleback for 7 mana. Ojor Coliseum Deepest Growth for 5 mana is a god card. When it deals damage, you can look at the top card of your deck, up to the number of damage dealt, and play a creature or land regardless of its mana value onto the battlefield. That's extremely powerful because, I mean, if you run this card with a lot of high mana value monsters, you could just cheese them out really easy, especially since it has trample. And when it dies, it becomes a land. It's a little bit harder to bring it back because you need to control 10 or more permanents, but still, I mean, it becomes a land, so it floats. Over the Edge is just close enough to being a meta card, but it's a sorcery, not an instant, meaning you can't use the second effect as like a battle trick during the battle phase to get a counter and beat over a monster. If you could, then it'd be legendary, but you can't because it's a sorcery, so we're going to have to pass on that one. Pathfinding Axjaw, 4 mana. 4/3 for 4 mana, and you only get to explore once? No. It's a 1/1 with reach. You can tap it to add mana, or you can give it Death Touch. I like it. It's good. It has a lot of versatility. The stats aren't the best, but the Death Touch ability just gives it like the upper hand where it makes it actually a versatile card that you would want to implement in a deck. Pugnacious Hammerskull is 3 mana, 6/6. Only downside is if you don't control any other dinosaurs, when it attacks, you get a stun counter, so you're not going to be able to attack for like 2 turns. River Herald Guide, 3 mana. It's a 3/1 with Vigilance. When it enters the battlefield, it explores. Actually not that bad. The only problem is it has 1 defense or 1 toughness, so that's the worst part about the card. But it has potential. Seeker of Sunlight is 1 mana, and for 3 mana, it explores. That is terrible. Sentinel of the Nameless City is 3 mana. It's a 3/4, but when it enters the battlefield, you get an immediate map token, and when it attacks, you get an immediate map token. It's good statted, it has vigilance, and it just generates a lot of value. One of the best green cards. I can see why it's a rare. Lands entering the battlefield tapped is a way to like balance the meta, but if they enter untapped, that means you could just play the best land decks in the entire game and not really feel any repercussions, especially since this not only draws you a card for 3 mana, but it also ramps up your field by putting a land in your hand onto the battlefield and potentially gains you life. It's just so much. Staggering Size 2 mana. No, it's whatever. Tendril of the Myrcontrium. It's not bad. It's 2 mana and it's a 2/2. Also, it's a fungus. Is that like an archetype? And wizard as well. This has potential. I don't know the cards that are related to fungus or wizards, but I mean, that's a crazy effect. That's a very cool effect for 7 mana. The Skullspore Nexus shouldn't exist. It's 8 mana, and it costs X less to cast if you have a monster with high power. Well, we were just looking at a good monster earlier. We were looking at Pugnacious Hammerskull, which is a 6/6 for 3 mana. Meaning that if you have the Hammerskull in your field, you can activate Nexus for only 2 mana. But that's just a little neat combo, right? Let's talk about the actual card. When your monster dies, it floats into a green fungus dinosaur creature token with the same power and toughness. That's a powerful effect for potentially playing this card for only 2 mana. But that's not it. For 2 mana, you tap this, you double a monster's power. That is a quick effect. It's not a sorcery, which means you can use that during the battle phase. You can use that as a trick using trample. This card is game ending. It's so easy to activate and it's just generating so much advantage. I believe if this card actually does become meta relevant, people are going to need to be running removal for artifacts because this card's just going to be too powerful. It's way too good. Thrashing Broad, I think this card might actually get banned. It's way too good. Thrashing Broadodon, 3 mana. So for 1 mana, sacrifice this to straight. Oh, wow. Oh, wow. I like it. All right, why did they put some of the best cards all next to each other? Twist and Turns for 1 mana does too much. It supports the exploration ability by giving you Scry 1 on top of Explore. They look through 2 cards of your deck, which is way more than it should. Not only that, it also just gives you immediate advantage when it hits a field by making a monster explore, which is good. Then it has a bonus effect where, like in late game, when you have 7 or more lands, it transforms into a land that for 4 mana, you can just look at the top 4 cards of your deck and add a monster every turn. It does too much. This card does way too much. It's the best Explorer card in the entire game. Last green card, Walk with the Ancestors, 5 mana. So essentially for 1 mana, you get to return a target permanent card from your graveyard to your hand. It's good. Alright, so we finished all the major colors and now all we have is multicolor, artifacts, and lands. I want to say this real quick before I get into multicolor. Skip like 10 or 20 seconds ahead if you don't want to hear this. But yeah, if the video is getting too long, just let me know in the comments down below, because I've never really done Magic videos that are this long. If you like these longer type of videos, just let me know. I'll do them more often. It's just they take a little bit longer to make. All right, let's jump into multicolors, and the first one is Albino Ancestral Echo for 3 mana. It's 1 plain, 1 water, flying ward 2. For 3 mana, exile another target creature artifact you control. I've seen that effect before. The thing I like about this card is that it has ward 2. The stats aren't that impressive though, sadly. Akawali's Assizing Tower is 3 mana, and it gets better based off the number of permanents you have in your graveyard. If you have 4, it becomes a 5/5 with trample. If you have 8 or more, it becomes a 7/7 that can only be blocked with 1 creature. So like the opposite of a menace. It's interesting. Amalia Bevadi's Agurori I think is only good because every time you gain life, it explores, and it can potentially get you a lot of lands or get really, really big. The only weird thing about this card is that it has an effect where it's like if it's exactly 20 power, it destroys all other monsters, including your own. I don't know if that's ever going to come up. It needs like, what, 18 counters on it? A Nimpakal 1000 Moon for 3 mana generates token without needing to attack. In fact, as long as it's on the field and you attack with another non-gnome creature, you put a counter on this card and then you generate tokens equal to the number of counters on this card. It's amazing. It's amazing. You're going to generate so many tokens with that. Bartomar de Presido is 2 mana, and I love it. But the only downside I can see about it is that it's a legendary creature, which means that you can't run multiple. But I do like that you can sacrifice another creature artifact and put a counter on this guy. Caporti Sunborn for 4 mana. When it attacks, you tap untapped monsters. You can discover 3. It's bad. I wouldn't run it. Captain Storm Cosium Raider for 2 mana is not good. The stats are eh. The effect is eh. Moving on. Deep Fathom Echo for only 4 mana is just a 4/4, which is good statted. It does so much. It does so much, and you don't need to do a lot in order for it to do stuff. All you need to do is just enter your combat. Then you get a card. And then you transform this into another monster. Incredibly powerful card. Gisha's Sun Avatar, 8 mana. Wow, Fire, Forest, Plain. It has Vigilance, Trample, Haste. Damn. When it deals damage, you can look at the top card of your deck equal to the damage that you dealt, and then play dinosaurs from them. Its Firstborn of the Gishna for 2 mana is good. It's Haste 2/3, which is not the best in the world, but it's decent. And it has a very good on-field effect. So it's removal, it's a decent body, and it doesn't cost that much mana. I love it. It's a great card. Kellen Daring Traveler is an amazing card. It's 2 mana and it's a 2/3. It's good statted. It has Journey On, which gives it like a lot of versatility. Essentially, you can create 2 or 1 map tokens. 1 if your opponent doesn't control an artifact. If they do, you create 2 map tokens. Map tokens allow you to explore, which generates value. And the monster effect on this girl is not bad. When she attacks, you reveal the top card of your library. If it's a monster with mana value 3 or less, put it into your hand, otherwise put it in the graveyard. Putting it in your graveyard is as good as putting it in your hand, in my opinion. She is one of the best monster cards I've ever seen. Only downside about her is that she's a legendary creature, can't play multiple. Godzil Malmet Exemplar for 3 mana. I love it. Your opponent cannot cast spells during your turn. That means no go for the throat, no cut down, no burn cards from red. That shuts down a lot of strategies and a lot of the best decks. Also, it has an additional effect which isn't as important, but it might come up. If a monster you control that has attack higher than its original value, so maybe has a counter like attacks, you can draw a card. So it's okay. I really like the no casting spells during your turn. That's power. That's a powerful effect, especially since it's a 3/3 decent statted monster. Master's Guide Muriel for 5 mana I think is pretty bad.
Yeah, you get a 4/4 immediately when it hits the field, and you could craft this for 7 mana into a monster that just continually generates artifact creature tokens, but that's only if an artifact or this card enter the battlefield that turn. So it has like a clause, you can't do it all the time, and the original effect isn't even that good. It's not worth considering in my opinion. I think that's a card that you might rip up. I would even run it in an artifact deck, honestly. I don't think it's good enough. Molten Collapse for 2 mana is sorcery, monster removal, or weird enough, removal for tokens or any card that is mana value 1 or less. It's not the best card in the world. In fact, I think it's pretty bad. I don't know why it's really rare. I think I would heavily pass on that. Nakil, Current Conductor for 2 mana is a card that all of the Explorer decks want. It just makes your Explorer effect even stronger. When you add a land to your hand, just put it onto the battlefield tapped. Or you put a counter on a monster, hey, why not put a counter on this card too? It just makes your Explorer really, really good. I love it. Alana's Hatcher is a great card for only 5 mana. It's 5/3, it's not the best statted, but it's decent. It has a good effect where other dinosaurs have haste. You get 2 tokens that have 0/1, so they're not the best statted, but as soon as you enter the battle phase, those 0/1 tokens, one of them turns into a 3/3, and it has haste from this card's effect. Ventorious Can for 5 mana is decent. Whenever you cast a spell from exile, you deal 2 damage, so it works really well with the mountain strategy. I really like the Discover 4 because, I mean, it immediately gets you a 4 mana value card out of your deck, which is good. And the exile from the graveyard isn't the most powerful effect, but it does kind of work with his passive, which is whenever you play a spell from exile, you deal damage. So potentially you could just like burn your opponent for game right there. Sally, the Sun's Brilliance, reminds me of Fabled Mirror Breaker, except she doesn't give you the other versatility. She's simply the token version of that monster. She's 2 mana and she's 2/2, and for an additional 2 mana and tapping this card, you can create a token that's a copy of another target creature or artifact you control. It has haste, which means that if it's a monster, you can attack with it. If it's an artifact, I mean, you could just generate the value from that. There are artifacts where when they enter the field, you draw a card. When they leave, you draw a card. So she can generate advantage on that end. I think she's just okay, but she's not super good. Sovereign Arknek Hahu for 4 mana can get out of hand really quickly, which is why I can see why its base stats aren't that good. It has Ward 2, which gives it a little bit of protection, which is nice. And also, it essentially, when it attacks, if any of your monsters have counters, it doubles those counters on them. It gets out of hand extremely quickly because 4 counters turns into 8, turns into 16, turns into game over. Squirming Emergence is essentially for 3 mana a monster reborn. Normally this effect is for 5 mana. The only catch with this is that you can only reborn a monster from your graveyard based off the number of permanent cards in your graveyard. I might try it. It might work in mid-range Galgori or whatever that deck is called, the Force and the Death deck. Have you ever seen the day where you would see a god for 2 mana? Well, the day has come. The Ancient One is here, and it's an 8/8 creature that cannot attack or block unless you have 8 or more permanent cards in your graveyard. I think the best card about this card is that for some reason, for 4 mana, you can draw a card, discard, which is like not that good, but then the additional effect, when you discard a card this way, target player mills cards equal to its mana value. Meaning, you can immediately trigger this card if you discard an expensive card from your hand. Get those 8 permits in your graveyard, now you have an 8/8 on your field for 2 mana. Like, bruh. Or you can make your opponent mill stuff and you can mill them out. It has versatility and it does a lot and I like it. It's very cool. Belligerent 4 mana. Cards like that are usually way more expensive than only 4 mana because not only do you get a monster which can generate you treasure tokens, which is mana, but you also just get to play cards off the top of your deck, which is essentially an additional draw. The Miscreant for 3 mana isn't really good stat-wise. It does have an effect where it gains like power and toughness equal to the number of fungi and sapling you control, but I mean, who's controlling fungi and sapling? That's probably not coming up. So this is usually going to be 0/0. The main reason I think you would even want it on your field is because at the end step, if you descend it a lot, if cards, permanents went to your graveyard, you can create that many creature black fungi tokens. Only downside is that those tokens cannot block, so I mean, it's not the best card in the world. Uchben Bak, the Great Mistake for 5 mana, is a card that can just summon itself back from your graveyard for 6 mana. It's 6/4, has Vigilance and Menace. You tell me if that's good. I think it's good. Vico, Fanatic of Alkazoids, seems like the boss for vampires. It's 4 mana and it's a 4/4, so it's decent. It also has flying, which is nice. It can go in for direct attacks. but its effect is weird. You need other cards to play around this one card. When you sacrifice another permanent, you gain 2 life. And if you do it a third time, you create a 4/3 flying vampire creature token. Now, that's cool. The last effect's pretty decent. It kind of duplicates itself almost. But how are you going to be fulfilling that cost? Will the Forgotten is way too good, right? Only downside, it's a sorcery, not instant, but the effects are really damn good. First off, target your opponent's card, return it back to the hand. They have to repay the mana value for that. That's good. Target opponent discards a card. That's not a bad effect. Decent. Or look at the top 3 cards of your library, put one in your hand and rest in the graveyard. That's essentially mill 2, draw 1. That's a really good effect for 2 mana. On top of that, you're going to do everything else if you have 8 or more permanents in your graveyard. Zoya, Lava Tongue for 2 mana. It's annoying because it has Death Touch, meaning it trades. And also, if it just stays on the field, you keep dealing 3 damage or getting rid of opponent's resources. And the stat line is good. It's 2/2 for 2 mana. Very cool card. Buried Treasure is 2 mana and it's a graveyard spell. And if it's in your hand, well, you're kind of like at a disadvantage because the on-field effect is pretty bad. Careening Minecart, 3 mana, artifact vehicle. It's 3/3 statted. When it attacks, you create a treasure token. I like it. It's generic. It's good. It generates tokens, and it's a common. PogChamp. Cartographer's Companion is pretty bad. When it enters the battlefield, you create a map token, but that's all it does. Okay, we got to talk about this. First of all, your spells can't be countered. That's a pretty damn good effect. The other one is at the beginning of your end step, which is the best one, you discover 5. So you can play a mana value 5 spell from your deck, or you can add it to your hand. You do that during each of your end steps. It just stays there. So it's too much advantage. Also, it's generic. It doesn't require any colors, meaning you can run this in virtually any deck. Compass Gnome, 2 mana. Contested Gnome Ball would have been a good card if it didn't have that first effect. But it's pretty bad. I mean, why do you want to give your opponent a draw 1? Why would you do that? Don't ever give your opponent cards. That's how you lose the game. Dig-Site Conservation for 2 mana is pretty bad because you can only activate its best effect, the exile from the graveyard, as a sorcery. When it dies, you could discover 4, but you're paying 4 mana anyways. It's not the best card in the world. Distributor, Wander Glyph for mana. No, even though it's an artifact creature, which means that you can like cheese this out really easy, it's still not good enough. Hoverstone Pilgrimage for 5 mana sucks. Yeah, it's Flying Ward 2, it's 2/5, and it does have a kind of graveyard removal effect, which is a quick play, but it costs 2 mana, it's a little too expensive. Hunter's Blowgun is kind of cool. I like it. Only downside is equip for 2 mana. That sucks, but I mean, hey, if it's your turn, your monster has Death Touch. If it's your opponent's turn, your monster has Reach. Mazzalia the Great Door is for 3 mana. You tap this card, draw a card, discard a card. That's an extremely powerful effect. You can do it during your turn, during your opponent's turn. For 4 mana, you can transform this card into a land that essentially just says, hey, you know all those cards in your graveyard? Well, all of those cards become mana. So now you get X number of mana up to the number of cards in your graveyard. Roaming Throne is an artifact creature I would run in my deck. It's good statted, it's 4/4, it's only 4 mana, and it has Ward 2 for protection. It's only really good if you run it in a deck where there's a bunch of triggered abilities of a certain creature, so you can trigger it an additional time. But it's a generic enough effect that you can incorporate this into a multitude of strategies. Runaway Boulder is 6 mana, it has Cycle for 2 mana, and it's also a flash removal of a creature that has 6 or less toughness. I mean, it's not bad. That's the thing. These aren't bad. They're not cards I would stay away from. I would run them if I had the chance, but there are better cards, but they're not bad at all. Scampering Surveyor, 4 mana. No, because you're paying 4 mana for a 3/2. Yeah, it does search your library for a card, but dude, you're paying 4 mana for that. There's better cards. Sorcery Spyglass for 2 mana gives me the Pin Needle vibe, where essentially it's like a card that's going to be banned in Commander. I mean, imagine you do Sorcery Spyglass, you say, hey, I'm going to target your commander ability's name. Dude, they can't even activate it anymore. They can't play it, right? It's just over. Yeah, this card definitely looks like it's going to be banned in Commander. It looks pretty cool. Pretty cool card. Sunbird Standard for 3 mana isn't necessarily good, but it is interesting. You can tap it for 1 mana. I mean, you're playing 3 mana for a card that can tap for 1 mana. It's not the most impressive thing in the world. But you could eventually craft this with other artifacts, whether they be in your graveyard or on your field, and make a monster with power and toughness based off the number of colors you use to exile to make it. Or you could just tap this, and based off the number of colors you use to exile, you can just add that mana. Smash Popular's Whip is too slow and it doesn't give you advantage in the beginning. It's something that I would consider garbage tier.
Valerian Soul Cleaver, I would say, is a good card because it does give you scaling by whenever an artifact or creature is put from the battlefield to the graveyard, you put a counter on whatever monster is equipped. But it doesn't give you an initial counter, it only gives you vigilance. It's a little too slow, especially since the equip is 2, could have been 1. Millennium Calendar seems like one of the best cards for a gimmicky or troll deck. Dude, to get 1,000 counters, that's a lot. That's like 17 turns, no? It might be 8, 9 turns max if you're maxing this thing out. It just doesn't make sense. You would run this in a Fundle, maybe an Explorer Historic. I would never run this in Standard. Threefold Thunderhulk seems like it's just going to carry games, although it's 7 mana and 0/0, which is terrible. It enters the battlefield with 3 counters, making it a 3/3, and it immediately generates 3 artifact creature tokens. Now that's power. Or more if you can increase the number of counters on this guy by just paying 2 mana and sacrificing another artifact. It does a lot for the artifact deck. It works perfectly with it. It synergizes well with the new powerful cards, and it's an incredibly competent boss monster. Throne of the Grim Captain is a low mana value, potentially game-ending card. Throne of the Grim Captain is a great card just for its normal effect. For 2 mana, you can activate this legendary artifact and tap it and mill 2 cards. That is a quick effect, it's not a sorcery. Eventually, if you can fulfill the Dinosaur, Murloc, Pirate, and Vampire cost, you can create the Grim Captain, which is a menace, trample, lifelink, hexproof that when it attacks, your opponent sacrifices a non-land permanent, and then you get to play one of the cards that was exiled to summon this. Just play it on the battlefield. Treasure map seems pretty slow, but some people might like it in certain strategies. For 2 mana, you get a 1 mana, tap this card, scry 1. When you do that effect 3 times, you can transform this card into Treasure Cove, which gets you 3 treasure tokens, and then it gives you the ability to sacrifice one of those and draw a card. Not the best card in the world. In fact, in my opinion, it's way too slow. Alright, we're on to the final cards. This is lands. I might go over them pretty quickly, but I know these are more important because these are the caves, which is what a lot of the cards are based off of. Captivating Cave isn't bad because it's essentially a common land that can give you value. It can put 2 counters on a monster. Only bad part is only activate as a sorcery and not an instant. Cavern of Souls essentially makes it so your creature spells of a chosen type cannot be countered. That's a direct negate to Ixalan, so that's pretty interesting. Cavernous Maw isn't the worst thing in the world because it does give you a land monster in cave decks, but it really does depend on how good cave land cards are in general. Besides that, it's only a 3/3 and you do need 3 caves on your field or in the graveyard, so you need quite a bit. Echoing Deep seems pretty cool actually. It just copies a land in your graveyard. That seems kind of powerful, no? I like it. And I think that's it. Oh no, there's more. Forgotten Monument just makes your other cave cards essentially become multicolor, which is kind of nice, but you have to pay life for it. Hidden Cataract is one of the best blue cards I've seen because it enters tapped, which sucks, and it does come up in games where you may be low in advantage, and this will help you out of that situation. No way, every color's getting it. Hidden Courtyard, Hidden Necropolis, Hidden Nursery, Hidden Volcano. These are commons? This is kind of cool. This is power creep, definitely. Pit of Offerings, the next land cave, and it's cool. When it enters the battlefield, exile up to 3 target cards from a graveyard. I don't think Magic has ever had a land that essentially says, hey, I'm a land, but I'm also a graveyard hate card at the same time. So you can use me like normally to play your game, but you can also use me as an offensive spell to get rid of advantage in the opponent's graveyard. Like, wow, man, these are good. Promising Vein. 1 mana, sacrifice this card. Search your library for basic land, put onto the battlefield, tapped and shuffled. I mean, it's not that good. The only reason you'd run it is because it's a cave. That's the only reason. Restless Anchorage. Enters the battlefield tapped. It's, whoa, Azorius Soldiers, new support? Hold up. For 3 mana, until the end of the turn, it becomes a 2/3 white. What? And it has flying? And when it attacks you, what the heck? This is one of the best cards in the game. No, for real though. This is like Restless Cottage, except now one of the best decks, Azorius Soldiers, has it. You generate map tokens, you have a flying monster land. Restless Parry is going to be good in token decks, mainly for the fact that it's a 3/3 for 4 mana, and when it attacks, other creatures you control get 1/1. So your tokens are going to get bigger, and it has good colors for token synergy. It's decent. It's a decent card. Restless Reef, on the other hand, is good because it's a 4/4 with Death Touch, which is scary. It's just a land. The only downside about this card is that when it attacks, your opponent mills 4 cards. Now, I don't even want to give my opponent cards a mill because they might mill something that they can play from their graveyard. But, I mean, you get a 4/4 Death Touch land. I mean, that's kind of hard to beat. Restless Ridgeline isn't as good, but it's still good enough. It's for 4 mana, you get a 3/4 dinosaur creature, which is nice because it works with the dinosaur engine. And also, when it attacks, another monster gets 2 attack. You also untap that monster. The untapping, I think, is more important because then you can use it as a blocker, which is excellent. Restless Vent is one of the best ones I've seen yet. First of all, it's 3 mana, and you get a 2/3, but it has Menace, meaning your opponent needs 2 cards in order to block it, and as long as it attacks, you discard a card and draw a card. Immediate advantage, it's decent monster, and it's a low mana cost compared to the other ones. The other ones are like 4, right? Sunken Citadel essentially can allow you to play your lands for cheaper by calling that color. It's not the worst thing in the world. In fact, I think I would actually run it if I'm running a bunch of these restless land cards. Is that it? This is the last card, I think, in the entire set. Volatile Fault. Volatile Fault reminds me of that land card, Ruin Something. They both destroy a target non-basic land, but this one generates you a token. I think I like the treasure token a lot. Anyways, that's going to be it for me. I hope you enjoyed this longer video. I put a lot of work into this, and I hope you enjoy it. I definitely saw a lot of cool cards that I like, and if there's any video ideas you want to see related to Magic, feel free to leave them in the comments or your thoughts down below. Regardless, my name's Eric, and I'll catch you next time. Later.